Hey, welcome to this live stream. We are going to be talking about something really important in music theory and songwriting as we do. And if you were on last week's live stream, then this is going to be a continuation of those ideas and expounding on those ideas and highlighting some interesting connections that we didn't really look at in the live stream on chord function. So chord function is a really important concept in music because it helps to guide chord progressions and give music a sense of momentum and direction using the functions or roles of chords within a given key to propel the music forward. And in last week's live stream, we talked about how to make sense of chord function using, and there's a link in the video notes to that live stream, but we're going to summarize some of those key points, but then really go to the next step of really using these patterns to make sense of some songs, using some song examples and some really good songs, some of my personal favorites. So we'll get into that. So chord function is a beautiful thing. And it's not just an arbitrary assignment of roles or functions to chords. It's based on some underlying patterns and principles that, again, we'll review here, but then take it to the next level by seeing all of this theory in action. We'll apply these patterns in practice, like I say, with some really great songs. So let's look at, we looked at this a bit in terms of chord function. This is Love Me Do by the Beatles. I think it's their first single. It's from 1962. Really simple. It's a really simple song, almost painfully simple compared to their great hits later on. And this is a heat map. It's a harmonic heat map using the different areas of chord function or areas within harmonic space to define the role and to really identify the role of a chord within each progression as the song moves along. We played through this song a little bit, but we're going to look at some other examples, including a great one, also by the Beatles, I Feel Fine, written by John Lennon in 1964. And we're going to look at another example as well that really unpacks these patterns and, like I say, puts these patterns into practice. So this is a harmonic heat map, if you will, a heat map in the sense that you can see what role or function a chord is as the song progresses. And it's interesting. It's like a heat map where you can see certain zones, certain concentrations of a certain quality. If you've seen those in analytical geographic maps, we can do the same thing with harmonic space in terms of chord function. But before we just jump straight into the song, let's do a quick recap of how we arrive at harmonic function in the first place, which is to let's take the chords in the key of G, for example, chords 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And so I'm going to skim through this because we covered this last week, but it's helpful to get our bearings to know what we're looking at when we get to the heat maps. So in the key of G, we have chords 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Or G, A minor, B minor, C, D, E minor, F sharp, diminished, and back to G. So it's basically just the G major scale on steroids or fleshed out with harmony between the chords as you move along. Now, you could take these chords, these 7 chords, and arrange them in all sorts of ways, but what guides those arrangements, chord function, is a big part of that. Now, if you just look at these chords as they're played on the guitar, it's not immediately intuitive how the chords are connected. Like, imagine this was a bunch of people, right? This is, these are the heads of people. And it's like a lineup of people. Like, without any sense of connection between the people, it might just look like a bunch of random strangers, when really this is like a family. There are actual connections, and each of these chords plays a certain role and serves a certain function within this family. And to explain those roles, those functions, we have the key in table format, where we look at the G major scale, and from the G major scale, we can derive 7 chords. And these 7 chords are G major, the major 1 in the key of G, A minor, the minor 2, B minor, C major, D major, E minor, and F sharp diminished. And each of those chords has certain qualities based on the intervals or the tertian intervals between them. So G to B is a major third, B to D is a minor third, and that's what makes it a G major chord, because that major third interval, the first interval in that chord, helps define the sound of that chord. So G to B to D is a G major chord. A to C is a minor third. C to E is a major third. So a minor third followed by a major third is a minor chord. A, C, and E is A minor. B to D is a minor third. D to F sharp is a major third. So a minor third followed by a major third is a minor chord. B, D, and F sharp is a minor third or minor chord, and so on. Okay, so we have these chords, these 7 chords, and if we take these chords and we look at the relationship between them, major third, major third, minor third, it's this wave of intervals that we can just flatten into a straight line. And once we flatten it, we wrap it into a loop and we have the circle of thirds. Again, this is a recap of what we looked at last week in terms of the relationship between chords within a key and how these form this circle or cycle, this loop of thirds, major thirds and minor thirds. And we're still labeling the root note of each chord with its Roman numeral, and we get the sequence of 1, 3, 5, 7, 2, 4, 6, and back to 1. Or an easy way to remember that, like, this kind of seems like a scrambled sequence of numbers. It kind of is, but kind of not. So we have all of the odd numbers first, 1, 3, 5, 7. So we're counting up with odd numbers. And then 2, 4, 6. And the octave of 1 is 8. So it's 1, 3, 5, 7, 2, 4, 6, 8. And then the cycle just repeats. So the circle of thirds is a really cool sequence because we can play these chords in sequence. Say we go from 1 to 3 to 5, 7, and so on. We have 1, 3, 5, 7, 2, 4, 6, 1, which is really nice, especially when I'm not talking over it. So I'm going to play that sequence one more time. So it's really nice. We're just going in a counterclockwise direction, or if we go in a clockwise direction, just playing the sequence in the other order, we have which sounds just as nice. It's just the reverse direction. Okay, so that much we've already kind of covered. Let's get into some interesting connections between these chords. And if you group these, like we saw, we have chords of stability, change, and tension. So these groupings come from classical analysis from centuries of yore, where basically we see that we can chop up the circle of thirds into these little segments. It's almost like taking a worm, take a little bit of a gruesome metaphor, and you chop it up into segments, and each segment kind of has its own harmonic purpose or function. These 3 chords are chords of stability. And so the tonic, the 1 chord, is the ultimate instability because it's the point of resolution. So a chord progression will resolve to the 1. But because it shares 2 notes, G major in this case shares 2 notes with both chords that flank it, the B minor chord has a B and a D in that chord, just like G has G, B, and D. And then also E minor has a G and a B, just like G major has a G and a B and a D. So these 3 chords all share some of the same notes, and they all have kind of a tranquil or calming, stable sound to them. And of course, the two chords that flank the tonic are not as stable as the tonic, the one chord, because the one chord is the ultimate point of resolution, but they're fairly stable, and that's why they take on the names, they take on the label of stability. Chords of change are chords that deviate from the stability. They rise up. You're suspended up into these chords of a 4 and a 2. So in this case, C and A minor. They both share some of the same notes in their respective chords. C major has C, E, and G, and A minor has A, C, and E. So together they have like a close relationship based on the fact that they share notes together. And those are chords of change that deviate from the tonic or deviate from the chords of stability enough to inject some variety, enough change to set a progression in motion. Because we could play a chord progression, say we're in the key of G and we're just playing a G chord. It's nice, but it's going nowhere. So you have to kind of like change it up, and chords of change kind of like create a sense of movement, and we can go back to the stability. So just moving between, in this example, 1, 4, 1, or we could go 1 to a 2 chord, back to a 1. Chords of change, again, inject enough variety or change in the harmonic homeostasis of stability to add some interest. Then we have chords of tension, 5 and 7. And again, those two chords share some notes in common. And this is the 5 chord, the infamous 5 chord. And they're called chords of tension because they really create a sense of longing for or desire to resolve to that one chord. So a D is like, ooh, a 5 chord or a 7 chord really wants to come to that tonic, to the chord of stability. So those are the functions. Again, this is a high level look because we covered a lot of this ground in the last live stream. But what's interesting about these chords is something that we looked at in last week's live stream, if you happen to be on that, is I'm going to undo some of these lines. This is kind of cool, actually. So a general way to describe the chords in terms of quality, not even in terms of function, but just the quality of the different triads, are major chords are, if I can mark it up, a major chord is like, we could draw a smiley face next to the major chords. Major chords have more of a kind of upbeat or full sound to them, while minor chords, like this A minor and this B minor, are a little more melancholy or sad. This E minor also has kind of a sad sound to it. And then the diminished chord is, we drew that as kind of a distraught looking face where it's like, oh no. And so major chords, happy. Again, these are very broad descriptions. It's arguable, and you could say that a major chord isn't just happy sounding, and that's fair. But just for ease of reference, major chords are generally happy. Minor chords generally described as a little more sad, and the diminished chord is very dissonant. If we take those same qualities and apply them to the circle of thirds, something really interesting stands out. So let's take, so we're not really focusing so much on the chord function right now. That'll come into play, but let's just draw a little smiley face next to the major chord, 1. It's a Roman numeral, capital Roman numeral. Let's draw a little smiley face next to the capital 4, the major 4 chord, and a smiley face next to the 5. And notice how all of these smiley faces are in this like consonant inner ring. We have all of the major chords are grouped together in this inner ring. If we draw little frowny faces for all of the minor chords, we have these minor chords around the perimeter. And then we have this diminished chord, the distraught looking face. I don't know if that's distraught or angry, but you can see that those form another ring around the perimeter. So they're kind of out in the outskirts of harmonic space. So interesting way to dissect the circle of thirds in a couple of different ways. We have chords of stability down here in this little grouping. We have chords of change up here, and we have chords of tension over here. But then also another layer, or another way that you can look at these chords is that we have these consonant chords, or the major chords, form this nestled, this snug little inner ring of happiness. And then we have the minor chords and the diminished chords that form this outer ring. They're not part of the in club, as it were, in terms of chords. So if we were just to focus on the chords of stability, change, and tension, but just the major chords, we are moving, in this case, the key of G, 1, 4, 5, 1. So I'm just sticking within these chords of consonants, major chords. But then if we were to just kind of hang out in the outskirts of minor chords and diminished chords, we have a 2, 6, 3, 7, and let's come back to the 1. So an interesting way to kind of keep your bearings within harmonic space, to know how these chords not only function in terms of their role of stability, change, and tension, but also in terms of their emotional quality, generally speaking, the relative happiness or sadness of the chords. And they form these patterns. It's not by coincidence. And actually in lesson 19 of the course, which will be coming out here, where we really dive into this in even more detail, these patterns, these positions of the harmonies relative to each other are not random at all. It's totally based on logic and patterns of nature, which is beautiful. But let's go a little further. And this is summing up what we just looked at here. Chords of consonants, the major chords form this inner ring, and the in club, as it were, of major chords. And then the dissonant chords of minor and diminished chords are in this outer ring. And so as you move between chords within a progression, it's not only movement between the roles of or the functions of stability, change, and tension, but it's also moving between these emotional qualities of happiness, sadness, and feeling distraught with the diminished chord. And so it's this multi-layered, it's like if you were to compose a play, and you have to, create a sense of, this thing happens in the story, and these characters are involved, and they have this certain dynamic in this relationship. And that's what makes a story interesting. And that's what makes a story, change. Like if you have a character who just stays at home, or is just resolved to being at home, they're sitting on their couch, it could make for a very boring story if they don't get up and leave the house and interact with different personality types and different functions or roles, different characters in that play. The same thing happens harmonically. If you were to personify these different chords and think of them and interact with them as if they were people with their own personalities and the relationships and dynamics, it really helps to guide you in the process of navigating harmonic space and creating chord progressions that are compelling. So let's see how this was done in the song I Feel Fine by John Lennon, 1964. So there's some really cool movement, some really classic movement between the 1, the 4, and the 5 in the intro and the outro, where we basically start with a chord of tension, and then we go to a chord of change, and then we ultimately resolve to a chord of stability. In the verse and the interlude, we move between these chords, again, cycling through chords of stability, change, and tension. We're not just staying within one zone, we're going out into the harmonic neighborhood to create some cool movement. And then in the chorus, It looks kind of crazy. It looks like it's like all over the place, but actually it's not that complicated. And looking at the heat map of harmonic space will help make some sense. So let's look at this song. I'm going to play through each section. I can never remember the lyrics of a song, so I'm just going to kind of busk it or do some scat singing here. But the intro is. So basically what I'm doing is I'm moving each chord progression is in a column per section. So we play the in this case, actually that should say, this should be a 5. It should be a 5. So it's 5, 4, 1. So 5, 4, 1 from top to bottom. So it's 5, 4, the C major, 1. And then we go into the verse section where, again, we're going to go from top to bottom. It goes from 1, 1, 5, 5, 4, 1. Again, we're just staying within that consonant inner ring of major chords, but it's got a really cool sound to it. It says, 5 to the 4 to the 1. And then he repeats that. 1 chord is the first chord. Yeah, the 1 chord is the first chord. 2, 5 chord. So there's some tension. We're like, you can't end the song there. It's like going to leave you hanging. It's chord of tension, so it's tension. And then we make our way to the chord of change, where it's like, we're kind of making our way back to some sense of stability, and then back to the 1 chord. So you can see with the heat map, these gradations of gray match. So this light stability oval is the color of the 1. And then this dark oval of tension, the 5 chord, is in that harmonic range of tension. Then we go to the chord of change, the 5 chord, which has this kind of light gray, and then we ultimately land on the 1. So notice how we're kind of making our way back to this sense of stability, this light gray. So again, I'm going to play the verse and verse section again. So it's the 1 chord is stable to a 5 chord of tension, a 5 tension, 4 change to 1 stability. And then you could land on that, stability if you wanted to, and it sounds complete because we made it back home. We got off our couch, to use our person sitting in his house metaphor, got up, walked around the neighborhood, interacted with different character personality types, and then finally made their way back home. But it's not the end of the song. We actually go into the chorus, and there's some really cool harmonic movement going on here, which is, so I'm going to play, again, we're moving down, but as we go, it's, left to right and down. So it's kind of making its way like this, if that makes sense. So let me get rid of those lines so you can see the progression. So this block is a heat map of this movement in the circle of thirds, if that makes sense. So it's a 1, 2, 3 to a 4 to a 5. 1, 2, 3 to a 2 to a 5. So let's slow that down and break that up a little bit, or break it down. So it's the 1 to the 3. You can tell there's some change there, but because we're still within the range of stability, this, I'm just going to zoom in. This 1 to the 3, we're moving from a 1 to a 3 within harmonic space, or within the circle of thirds. And so it's not a whole lot of change. We're still moving just between 2 chords of stability. Both of those chords share 2 notes in common. So it's not a whole lot of change. Not a whole lot of, we haven't embarked into really different harmonic territory yet. So it's, and then we go to a 4 to a 5, or to a chord of change, and then tension. So it's stability, stability, change, and tension. And you can see in the heat map here that that's what those gradations are showing us. It's 1, 3, 2 chords of stability, and then a chord of change to tension. And so we go to that 5 and we're like, we got to do something with that. It's like it's pent up tension. So then we go back into the 1, 3, 2 chords of stability, and then another chord of change, but instead of C, like we did on this first pass, we go to A minor. Both of those chords are chords of change. And instead of playing C, we swap it out for C's relative minor, or A minor. So the progression sounds very similar. It's almost identical from one segment to the next in terms of the chorus, but we throw in that A minor and it gives it an extra oomph. Part of the reason that it has that oomph is because it's a minor chord instead of a major chord. So let me get rid of some of my scribbles here, and you can see this in terms of the major chord, minor chord, or mood element of the chords, that we go from a major chord. So I'm going to circle, and you can see with the Roman numerals, but we go from a major chord, major chord, major chord. They're mostly major, major chord, major chord, but we do have some minor chords. And those minor chords add their own flavor to the song, not only in terms of function, in terms of stability, change, and tension, but also the mood or the quality that they have in terms of relative happiness or sadness, if you will. And John Lennon, being brilliant, plays with that sense of emotion by, in the lyrics, it's really cool. He says, "I'm so glad," but he plays a minor chord when he says glad. So it's, "I'm so glad." So it's like there's this cognitive dissonance between the words he's singing, glad, and the quality of the chord that he plays when he says glad. And there's some nuance there because in 1964, his marriage was already starting to hit some rough patches. And so I don't know if it was conscious, but the fact that when he says, "I'm glad to be married to my wife," that he divorced not super long later, and playing a minor chord, maybe, we're doing some psychoanalysis, but it's interesting to see how music theory can add an extra lens of understanding based on what's going on here. So it's, "I'm so glad that she's my little girl." So that's the first half, and then we go, "She's so So that minor chord makes it sound interesting because you kind of think you're going to go to the 4. You're kind of anticipating that 4 because it's a repeat of the first segment, segment 1, segment 2. It sounds like it's going to go in the same direction, but by playing this other chord of change, similar to the 4, but its own quality, a minor chord out in this dissonant ring of minor chords, it doesn't throw you for a loop, but adds some unexpected interest that keeps the song moving forward. So together, these two layers, these two elements of chord function, along with the mood or sound, whether it's major, minor, or diminished, all of these different qualities are at play. And in this case, it's a masterful example of how John Lennon is brilliant in how he used these different qualities, setting up your sense of expectation, and then kind of throwing you a curveball right when you think it's going to go somewhere. But he's using the qualities and the functions of chords to set up that expectation. It's not a random chord sequence. It's definitely based on these patterns of play. One more example is the song "Drive My Car" from 1965. And these song examples are in lesson 7 of the music theory course. So if you go to mycolormusic.com, there are lesson 7, and there's a link in the video notes as well that spells out all of these examples in way more detail, lesson 7. But let's look at "Drive My Car," another song by the Beatles, this time by Paul McCartney in 1965. And you can see that it's got a different kind of pattern. The heat map here is spelling out different movement through harmonic space. So the chords, now we're in the key of D. So in this case, D is the tonic, or the one chord. It's the same. That's the cool thing about each key, is the circle of thirds, or the chord functions. The same structure of chords is the same from one key to the next. It's just different chords. So in the key of D, we have the same thing going on, where we have chords of consonants in this inner ring, the 1, 4, 5, and then chords of relative dissonance, the 2, the 6, the 3, and the diminished 7 in this outer ring. Now, though, we're just in the key of D. So we're playing with a different set of characters, to use our personified chord lens, but they serve, they're found in the same positions, due again to the same logic of music theory and how the circle of thirds is formed. So let's play this progression, and you'll see basically we're moving back and forth between stability and change. Here, I'm just going to mark it as stability, change, stability, change, stability, change, and then we get a nice sense of tension at the end. And that tension, we're going to want to do something with it. We're feeling bottled up. And so as we move to the next chord, the next song section, the next chord progression, the cool thing is we move through stability, change, stability, change, stability, change. But instead of the same chord of stability, we're using a different chord of stability, a minor chord. But you can see from the gray pattern of harmonic function that it's the same pattern, but we're using different chords to keep things interesting. So let's play the first parts. The verses. Let's see what's the key. So. Whoops. I want to do something in between. So that A chord, the 5, is like, ooh, we are suspended. If you ended on that 5, it would be super dissatisfying, because you need to do something with that tension. We need to resolve somehow. And so he does resolve it, but not completely. He goes to this 6 chord, which is a chord of stability, but it's not the 1. And so it's not like as satisfying as, oh, just landing on the 1. He goes to the 6 chord, which is, it gives you, he's giving you something. He's like, okay, look, I know you want some stability, but I'm going to go into the minor chord of stability, or the relative minor, the 6 chord. So the song isn't fully done. Like the momentum is continued. And so now he's going, yes, I'm going to be a star. Baby, you can drive my car. Baby, I love you. Let's see. I got lost because I was like getting into lyrics. I never sing the lyrics. So let me try that again. So it's minor 6 to a 4, minor 6 to a 4, a minor 6 to and then it goes to the 2, 5, 1, 4, 5. Okay, so let's kind of zoom in on this section, because it's pretty awesome. It's like this perfect little microcosm of excellent harmonic movement. Okay, so leading up to that, it's just basically from stability to change, but it's the 6 to the 4. And then this part, let's focus on this part. He goes to the 2, which is a chord of change, and then it's tension. So I'm basically just going 1, 2, 3, 4. You can see with the gradation that it's tension, stability, change. Oh, sorry, let me do that again. Tension, stability, change, tension. And so if we just played those chords in sequence a few times, so 5, 1, 4, 5, 5, 1, 4, 5. We're basically just cycling through. You can see in the change of chord function in terms of grayscale that we're just moving between tension, stability, change, and tension, which is a really nice sequence. Tension to stability, but we're not done yet. We're going to go to change to keep the momentum going, to keep the movement going, because the song's not done. And then from change to tension, that tension is built up again. It wants to go somewhere, and that tension resolves to stability in the bridge section. And that's how the song then ends, is it just cycles through these different roles or functions of stability, change, stability, change, stability, change, tension. And then that tension always wants to resolve to the stability of the one again. And so there's this cool, you can see it. It's just with the heat map, you can see this like alternating pattern of stability to change. It goes to tension, lets the tension build, and then it just goes through it again. And so the song like just moves itself forward. Paul McCartney isn't imposing himself on the music so much as he's allowing these natural tendencies or these functions of the chords to guide him along the way. Of course, he obviously wrote the song and was actively involved with its creation, but you can see how the chords themselves, with their functions, with their dynamic relationships at play, kind of like lend themselves, more than kind of, they definitely lend themselves to this movement. And by playing with or allowing the music to unfold using the natural patterns of music theory, you can allow a really cool chord progression to come about. Paul McCartney described the songwriting process as pulling a rabbit out of a hat, which makes it sound more mysterious and literally more magical than it actually is. It's using objective existing patterns to produce amazing art. That's how it's done. So looking at these two examples side by side, the songs that we just played through, I Feel Fine and Drive My Car. Oh, if I show it, it'll be easier to see. So you can see that these two examples are pretty different from each other. They're both using, and something to keep in mind is these are both in a major key. And so this sense of chord function really is especially applicable to a major key when the tonic is a 1. In this case, this is in the key of G. I Feel Fine is in the key of G, and Drive My Car is in the key of D. But you can see how chord function functions the same in both, but you can move in different ways through harmonic space. So this example, you start with tension, you kind of build up some tension, and tension kind of shows up in a less rhythmic way. Whereas in Drive My Car, it's almost like this every other pattern of stability and change. You build up the tension, every other pattern of stability and change, build up the tension a bit, and then you go through stability and change, build up the tension. And so that tension is it's almost like a flywheel where, imagine you have I don't know when flywheels are used, but it's like a giant stone. I don't know if they use it in the milling industry or something, like to grind wheat or whatever, but it's this giant stone that like, once it gets momentum, it kind of just like keeps going on its own. But harmonic function, as you cycle through those different functions, in this case, the circle of thirds, that momentum really kind of like propels itself forward once you get it going. And so I think Drive My Car is such a beautiful example of how that's done. Once you hit that sense of tension, it like just propels itself into the next section of stability. Tension propels itself into the next section of stability and back to tension. And it's a beautiful thing, how chord function works that way. So that is chord function in a nutshell. And with the song examples, hopefully putting these principles into practice. Like I say, the live stream last week was more emphasis on the formation of the circle of thirds and how that came about, with a little bit of an example with Love Me Do. This time it's more of an unpacking these songs and dissecting these songs, still at a pretty fast clip though. So like I say, lesson 7 dives into this in much more detail and expounds on these ideas with lots more illustrations. TX30, thanks for joining. It's cool to have you on. So why is the 5th chord so annoying to play over? I can't get it to sound right or good. So the 5th chord, so let's say, for example, in the key of G, right? So we have 1, 4, a C major, D is the 5 chord, and G. So when you say play over, are you talking about like if you were to like have a solo going over the 5? Is that what you mean when you say play over it? I guess just to make sure that I understand the context. So for example, okay, cool, perfect. So the 1, 4, 6, 5, 4, 1 progressions, I can't get the 5th chord to sound right when I solo over it. Okay, so let's play that in the key of G. Let's just use G as an example. So the okay, so let's go to the second one. So 1, 5, 6, 5, 4, 1. I'm not necessarily using the rhythm that you have. So 1, 5, 1, 4, 6, 5, 4, 1. So that's an interesting question, and why it can't sound right. I guess what pattern are you using, like a pentatonic scale to play over that progression? Or are you using just like a major scale from the major key to accompany that progression? I'd have to hear it to kind of get a sense of why it sounds annoying or doesn't sound quite right. The 5 chord, I mean, the chord function of a 5 chord is a chord of tension. And so it is building up a sense of like a lack of resolution. I mean, tension by definition is a lack of resolution. So depending on how you're going about soloing over it, it might not be building up that tension, or the solo might be not be accentuating the role of that chord in the chord progression. Would be a guess, but I'd have to hear it to kind of get a sense for it. But it's good. It's a good question and an interesting one. Hey, Keen Music, it's cool to see you on. So I like how I feel fine is in all caps. Like John Lennon doesn't actually feel fine, but he's saying that to make you quit bothering him. Yeah, it's funny. He wrote "Help" the next year in all caps with an exclamation point, saying I don't feel fine. So, and he said when he wrote "Help" that it was literally a cry for help. And he thought no one really noticed, because they're like, what do you need help with? You're on top of the world. And he's like, no, seriously, help. I need someone. So yeah, I Feel Fine is it's amazing how you can come up with such amazing songs, such amazing melodies and riffs with such a basic chord progression. But again, if you're sticking with those consonant chords, which most of that song is between the 1, the 4, and the 5, and given they have certain roles or relationships within the circle of thirds and within harmonic space, it makes for an amazing chord progression, even with such simple chords. The 1, the 4, and the 5 are popular, and you can build really any song with that basic skeleton, not because they just sound good, but also because they serve those certain functions, or they have those certain properties that each contribute to the others to propel a song forward. It's interesting. Al, it's cool to see you on. Hey, so I get the F sharp diminished chord as tension, but not the D. Okay, so let's look at that with, let's use the keyboard, for example, okay? So we're going to stick with the key of G. So we have a G chord, okay? So we have a G chord, or the key of G is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Hopefully that volume is okay. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now I'm moving from this octave to that octave, but if we were to go the other direction, we have 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So let's treat this G as kind of in the middle of the key. We could go 1, 2, 3, 4, or we could go 8, 7, 6, 5. So this G is in the middle. If we play G, B, and D as the chords in, or the notes in that tonic chord, or in the 1 chord, those are the notes. Now, if we play a D chord, so D, So D, F sharp, and A is the 5 chord. Or we could play an inversion of that, D, F sharp, and A. Notice how F sharp and A both straddle G. In the key of G, we could go, again, 1, 2, 3, 4. We could go 8, 7, 6, 5. So the 2 and the 7 straddle G. And so those two notes, this one wants to go, or the leading tone, as the 7 is also known, the leading tone wants to lead to the 1. So it's or both of them want to gravitationally resolve to that tonic chord or the tonic note. So and both the 2 and the 7 are notes in the D or the 5 chord. So or and then the diminished chord, likewise. That 7 chord includes an F sharp, an A, and a C, or in this case the 7, the 2, and the 4. The same thing in that diminished chord. Those two notes. I mean, there's more reasons for it, but that may help visualize why both the 7 and the 5, because they both include the F sharp and the A in the key of G, or intervals 7 and 2, they both straddle the tonic or the 1. And so both chords, the 5 and the diminished 7, resolve or create that tension of or create that tension that wants to go to the tonic. Yeah, so chord function, it's a beautiful thing. And along with the layers of, again, function with the qualities of major versus minor chords, help to add the different layers that you can use to create a progression that is really satisfying and propels itself through harmonic space in a satisfying way. So that is it in a nutshell. Like I say, lesson 7 in the course goes into way more detail. It's a great foundation for everything that follows in terms of composition, writing chord progressions that sound good, and chord progressions are the main ingredient or a major ingredient in songs. So if you want to write your own songs, understanding harmony is essential. So thanks for joining on this one, and we will be talking real soon, geeking out with you on the next one. I hope you have a great rest of your evening, and we'll talk soon.